Evet değerli dostlar, biraz gecikmemiz oldu herhalde 5-10 dakika, kusura bakmayın. Akdim'in düzenlemiş olduğu demokrasinin küresel yükselişinin Mevlana perspektifinden günümüze yansımaları konulu konferansımız olacak. Şimdi tabii Amerika'dan da çok değerli bir misafirimiz var. Profesör Ori Soltes. Kendisi Mevlana üzerine ciddi çalışmaları olan bir entelektüel. Kendilerine de buradan hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Programımızın planlaması şöyle olacak. 30'er dakika konuşma hakkımız var. 30 dakika karşılıklı konuştuktan sonra sizlerden soru cevap kısmına başlamış olacağız. Bir 30 dakikada belki 45 dakikada duruma göre bir soru cevabımız olur. Soruları görevli arkadaşlara kağıtlara yazarak verirseniz daha münasip olacağını düşünüyorum. Ben sözü çok fazla uzatmak istemem. Özellikle Mevlana, günümüz, demokrasi bunlar çok önemli kavramlar. Dolayısıyla bu konunun uzmanı, bunun da kitabını da yazmış olan çok değerli akademisyen Profesör Doktor Ori Soltes'e sözü veriyorum. Buyurun, süreniz 30 dakika. Okay.
Merhaba. I apologize for speaking English, but my Turkish is poor enough that if I tried, even I would not understand myself. So hopefully our wonderful interpreter will help us all. I want to speak really about 5 things this evening, like the 5 pillars of Islam. The first is mysticism. Mysticism, which in every religious tradition implies for the individual a desire, a wish to achieve a kind of oneness in his or her relationship with God, an intensity of relationship that everyday religion does not achieve. This is the goal of the mystic. The word mysticism comes from a Greek word, mysterion, which means something that is hidden. So it implies that there is a hidden center of God that the mystic wishes to access, that everyday religion does not manage to access. And one of the features that defines the mystical tradition in every religious tradition is that the mystic has to empty himself or herself of ego. If I am to be filled with God, I need to be emptied of myself, because if there's too much of myself, there's not enough room for God. And one of the consequences of this is that on the one hand, most of the major mystics in Islam, in Christianity, in Judaism, have first of all also been jurists. They have also had very intimate understandings of their respective faiths, because each of them understands as the primary means of gaining a relationship that is so intense and so deep with God is to go through the particular faith of which they are part. So a Sufi is going to seek God through Islam. A Jewish mystic is going to seek God through Judaism. A Christian mystic is going to seek God through Christianity. So a Sufi is going to start with the Quran, and a Jewish mystic is going to start with the Torah, and a Christian mystic is going to start with Jesus and the Gospels. So on the one hand, a mystic is likely to be well versed in his or her form of faith, but on the other hand, and this is what is so important for this evening's discussion, a mystic recognizes that there are an infinite number of paths to the one God who created a universe with an infinite number of aspects, a God that created human beings that are infinite in our diversity. And a true mystic understands that if I believe that the only way to God is my way, then that's my ego speaking and not my connection to God succeeding. So it isn't surprising, for example, if in turning, for example, to Sufism, that if one looks at the work of Ibn Arabi in the 12th century, that he was both an important jurist for Islam and an important mystic for Sufism. And it's not surprising that while he wrote on Islam, he also could write words like these: "My heart can take on any form, a meadow for gazelles, a cloister for monks, for the idols, sacred ground, Kaaba, for the circling pilgrim, the tablets of the Torah, the pages of the Quran. My creed is love. Wherever its caravan turns along the way, that is my belief, my faith." So Ibn Arabi is both an intense Muslim, and he is also, in a way that is way ahead of his time, a universalist. He thinks both in Islamic and interfaith terms. And like him, Jalaluddin Rumi, who, as you know, ended up not far from here in Konya, a refugee from Persia in the face in the 13th century of the Mongol invasions, who came to what is now Turkey, someone who is a native, as it were, of two different lands, of two different languages, of two different cultures, and who is above all an intense Muslim, who is, and was rather, an intense Sufi, and who introduced an altogether radical and new method of beginning the process of contact, intense contact with God, what in Arabic is called dhikr, that instead of it being verbal, it became, as you all know, with him, physical, so that his tariqah became known eventually for the manner in which its practitioners not only entered into a spiritual state in the mental sense, but rather than by meditating on a word in the physical sense, that they would spin and spin and spin, one hand pointing down toward the earth, one hand pointing up toward the sky, so that every practitioner himself is, as it were, a connection between earth and heaven. That not only is this part of Rumi's legacy from the 13th century, but he is credited with words like these: "I go into the Muslim mosque and the Jewish synagogue and the Christian church, and I see one altar." Or words like these: "Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I am not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I belong to the beloved. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, first, last, outer, inner, only that breath breathing human being." Like Ibn Arabi, Rumi lives during a period, both of them live during a period, when Christians and Muslims are slaughtering each other in the era known to the West as the Crusades. It's an era when within the Muslim and within the Christian worlds, people are slaughtering each other over religious issues. And like Ibn Arabi, Rumi is both an intense and unequivocal Muslim, a Sufi, but also a universalist, someone who recognizes that there are infinite paths to the one God, that those paths are as diverse as humanity is and as the universe is. So I said I wanted to talk about 5 things this evening. The first was just a brief comment about mysticism and the desire to be in contact with the mysterion, to be filled with God, and the paradox of being both intensely what you are, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a whatever, and yet universalist, because to be otherwise is to be too preoccupied with one's own ego. And secondly, to speak about, very briefly, Ibn Arabi as an example of that way of thinking. And thirdly, to think of Jalaluddin Rumi as an even better known example of one who thinks along those sorts of lines. The fourth issue, as it were, that I would bring up, of course, is a contemporary heir to these traditions, an heir to the tradition of Ibn Arabi and Rumi, as well as an heir to the tradition of Socrates and Plato, as well as an heir to the tradition of Einstein, as well as an heir to the tradition of Nursi. And the man of whom I speak, of course, is Fethullah Gülen, who emulates this model of seeking oneness with God by seeking oneness with all of humanity, because as Gülen says, love of humanity is love of God. Love of God is love of humanity. And Gülen demands from those who follow him that they be tolerant of all humanity. As he puts it, to have hearts wide like the ocean and to seek to become more perfect human beings. He writes, and now I'm quoting from Gülen, "Those who do not embrace all of humankind with tolerance and forgiveness have lost their worthiness to receive forgiveness and pardon. Those who curse will be cursed. Those who beat will be beaten. If true Muslims observe such Quranic principles as the following, and were to go on their way and tolerate curses deep in their breasts, then others would appear to implement the justice of destiny on those who curse us." Muslim is a term that Gülen defines as someone who conforms to his description of being tolerant. His view of Islam simply is of a faith that exemplifies the principles that he embeds in the word tolerance. Being tolerant, he writes, does not mean foregoing the tradition that comes from our religion or our nation or our history. In his terms, it's not to be un-Muslim or not to be un-Turkish or not to be un-Turkic. Tolerance is something that has always existed. In the name of dialogue, we can unite on common ground and shake hands with all. This is because the things that God gives most value to are human beings, love, and compassion. Gülen's understanding of tolerance is expressed in a number of ways. In his essay, Love of Humankind, he summarizes in the broadest possible terms what this is about. He connects love with humanity for an even more encompassing love, love of the planet in all of its components, not just humanity, but the plants and the animals that are around us. And he reminds the reader of the place of Rumi as a key foundation stone in such thinking. He writes, "Our interest in our environment and our love for humankind, that is, our ability to embrace creation, depends on knowing and understanding our own essence, our own ability to discover ourselves, and to feel a connection with our Creator." He writes, "A soul that can sense this depth says, as Rumi did, presenting us tales from the language of the heart, come and join us, as we are the people of love devoted to God. Come, come through the door of love and join us and sit with us. Come, let us speak to another, one to another through our hearts. As our hands are clasped together, let us talk about it. Islamic thought, Gülen writes, sees each one of us as a different manifestation of a unique or, as different aspects of one reality. And Gülen, of course, is not just a theorizer. He doesn't only write about the theory of combining being a Muslim with being a universalist. He has been, in the course of his adult life, an activist, someone who felt that theory had to be transformed into action to be of any use. And the way in which he articulates this, it strikes me most obviously, is through two related aspects of what as human beings we can and should do. One, of course, is the process of education, of educating ourselves and educating our children. For those young and old, education is a key. He writes, children form the most active and productive part of a community. After every 30 or 40 years, those who have little children and pay no attention to them should consider how important an element of people's life they are disregarding and shudder. Whatever is spent for the upbringing of young generations to elevate them to the rank of humanity will be like an inexhaustible source of income. So part of his articulating the theory of Islam as a theory of universalism into action is the importance that he places on education, and particularly on educating the young, teaching them to think, teaching them to be aware of the possibilities of being in a world that is diverse and beautiful in its diversity. Part of what he wants to teach children, and this is the second most prominent feature, it seems to me, of his transforming theory into action, is that we should think less of ourselves and more of others. So he talks of what we speak of as altruism, a kind of selflessness. He often uses that term to refer to the outcome that he seeks for those who become inspired by his words, those who pass through the schools that articulate that inspiration in an educational context. This term, referring to one's willingness to do things for others purely in order to do so, purely as part of the expression of oneness with God as one's goal, as opposed to doing things with the expectation or the hope of some sort of recompense beyond the satisfaction of having helped someone else. He treats this not only as an outcome of love and compassion, but as something which creates the sentiments of love and compassion. Altruism, he writes, an exalted human feeling generates love. And as such, his goal for those who are inspired by his words in translating theory into action is hizmet, is service. The point and purpose of following the kind of course of being in the world that Gülen sets forth is to yield individuals, each of whom may be called a man of hizmet, a man of service, as he terms it in the title of one of his essays. And again, I quote him, "Such an individual holds everyone in high regard and esteem. He is so balanced and faithful to God's will that he will not turn into idols those whom he praises for their services. He has to be considerate and fair-minded to everyone who comes to his aid and support the truth, He is moderate and tolerant when he has taken wing anew and soared to the summits, so sincere and humble that he will never bring to mind all that he has accomplished. The person of hizmet, of service, then, not only performs services for others in an altruistic manner, he or she acknowledges the hizmet of others, but in a down-to-earth, very matter-of-fact kind of way. And Gulen writes, if such people, those who live a life of hizmet, of serving others, can reflect this duty of service and responsibility in the work and service that they carry